Welcome, everybody, or I guess I'm being welcomed to you, vice versa. But it's really a pleasure to be able to meet with you to talk about a subject of such deep mutual interest, the women who worked at the Harvard Observatory. And I today would like to share with you the story of how my play came to be, The Women Who Mapped the Stars. A play about 5 of the women familiar to all of you working on PHaEDRA or working at Wolbach. Williamina Fleming, Antonia Mori, Annie Jump Cannon, Henrietta Leavitt, and Cecilia Payne. And it began back in March 2016 when a young theater director in Boston named Jessica Ernst approached me and said, I would love to direct a play about these women. Would you be interested in writing it? Well, I had never heard of the women. And Jess, the director, had only recently heard of them from watching Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos series. There's an episode in which, as you probably know, he talks about the women at some length, and including how they have still not received the recognition that they deserve for their work. Well, I very quickly became fascinated by what I began learning about them. I got hooked just very, very fast on them and on the subject. And I said, yes, I want to write the play without really having any idea of what I was getting into. So a photo that you all are familiar with, of course. But from my point of view, as the dramatist to be, how in the world do you make a play out of this? Where's the drama? Where's the action? Where's the suspense? Where are the big stage-worthy events? Where are the, where's the story? Where are the complicated and hopefully passionate or even explosive relationships? Instead, we're looking at an image of slow, quiet, detailed, routine, sometimes even tedious work conducted over many years, over decades. And I began to wonder how in the world I could make a play out of this material. And that wasn't the only problem. This slide represents approximately the state of my astronomical knowledge at the time we began. I could recognize Orion's belt, but I had never studied astronomy, and I had an enormous amount that I needed to learn, both about the science and the history of the science, if I was going to write about 5 astronomers. And there were other issues, other challenges. I began learning as much as I could, as fast as I could, about the women individually and collectively in terms of their relationships with one another. The group of 4, all born within a decade, are roughly contemporaneous, and I could think of them as a group. They all knew each other. But Cecilia came a generation later. So how was I going to integrate her into an action that involved these other women a generation earlier? And, how is this possible to make a play out of this group of characters who were never, ever all in the same room together at the same time? Cecilia, when she came to the observatory, she never even met Henrietta and Mina, who had died before she arrived. So that was a challenge, to think about time and how I could construct a dramatic action using time that was also historically accurate, because I felt a profound commitment to making the play as historically accurate as I could, not least because I wanted to honor the women and what they had achieved. So Mina, who to me looks like a duchess in this photograph, at least, and it's really hard to reconcile this with the understanding that she began working at the observatory, or before she even went there, she began working for Edward Charles Pickering as a housemaid. She obviously was a formidable personality as well as evidently brilliant, and was rapidly promoted by Pickering, of course. Her personality seemed to have made a profound impression on the people who worked at the observatory and who were supervised by her. And Cecilia Payne said that years after Mina's death, people at the observatory were still in awe of her and still intimidated by her. So that was something that I wanted to use in constructing the play. Antonia, in all of her photographs, to me looks sardonic and skeptical, as she does here. She was a very outspoken and challenging personality, and I gave her that persona in the play. I built her character around that. She was the first woman to have work published under her own name in the observatory annals. She insisted upon it, and that helped pave the way for later women. And Annie Jump Cannon. Annie, Cecilia, of course, worked with Annie for many years at the observatory. Cecilia said, Annie, she said this in an obituary that she wrote after they had worked together for many years. Annie was the happiest person I have ever known. And that became a kind of touchstone for me in trying to think about Annie as a character, how to get a handle on her for the drama. She was apparently not only extremely sociable and gregarious, but a very loving person with a very sunny disposition who inspired love and affection in other people wherever she went. And that's wonderful for Annie, but it wasn't wonderful for a playwright because we don't usually like to put completely happy and contented people on stage. They're just not interesting on stage. They're wonderful in life, but not on stage. So I needed to find a way into Annie that dealt with more than just her geniality and her happiness. And this quote, can you all read this? Yeah. This is something Annie wrote after her mother's death, to whom she was very devoted. And after starting work at the observatory, my heart, my life are now the study of astronomy. They little know what it means to me, how it was the only thread holding my reason, almost my life. And that, the emotional intensity of that really hit me when I read it. And I took that as central to Annie, that working at the observatory and doing astronomy even more fundamentally, it was a life or death matter. It came out of a need so deep that it was a life or death matter. The love story in this play turned out to be the love of astronomy, the love for the stars, the love for doing this work that motivated all 5 of these women throughout their lives. And that's the passion that I was trying to sense and to elicit and to articulate in the play. Because every one of the women, I think, could sign on to this statement in one way or another. Annie in older age, and I love the fact that the photos of the women showed them at later stages of life too, like this one. I mean, Annie, who spent her life devoted to this work, as did they all, and who became acknowledged as the world's expert in stellar classification. And that seemed a very important thing to try to get into the play. I didn't want to just write a play about one day in the life at the observatory. I mean, part of their importance and value, it seemed to me, was that they created whole lives for themselves as scientists. But this again was a challenge for making the play. How do you create an action that can somehow span or stretch over this very long span of time, decades? Henrietta Leavitt was a different kind of challenge. So reserved, so modest, apparently, so quiet that there's almost nothing in the documentary record in her voice, which was a problem for me, trying to hear what she would sound like, how she would talk, what kind of gestures she would use, how she would present herself to other people. But I actually found a lot of her eloquence in her notebooks, um, which are so beautiful, as Anna von Mertens was saying at the last one of these talks. Seem to reveal so much about her personality, their carefulness, their meticulousness, the endless, enormous quantities of data that she recorded. I found the notebooks tremendously eloquent, and there's her famous graph. This is, of course, a simplified version of her graph, which we needed to use on stage. So I said this has to be in the play in some way. Henrietta's discovery of the period luminosity relation, which became the basis for determining or calculating the distance to the stars. She wasn't looking for this, as far as we know, I don't think, but she found it. And I wanted to include the excitement of that discovery in the play. Picture of Cecilia Payne. I'm guessing this is taken in England, maybe shortly before she came to Cambridge, to Harvard, probably maybe even taken at Cambridge in England. She came when she was 23 in 1923, having been born in 1900. And Cecilia, it was easier to find information about her, not least because she published an autobiography, extremely helpfully, and not just any autobiography, but an absolutely wonderful autobiography, The Dyer's Hand, which I relied on very, very much, one of the most valuable resources to me for writing the play. And if you didn't already believe that she was a genius from her scientific work, I feel like you can tell she's a genius from the way she writes. She's an absolutely brilliant writer. And not only did she write about herself, but she wrote about all the other women too. So it was a great resource for me. And I just want to mention two things about what I learned about Cecilia. One is a statement of hers that went right into the play. I read it, it went right into my brain. I couldn't forget it. I thought it was such an amazing sentence. And I put it in the play. I put it in her mouth in the play. She says it at one point. And it's this: there is no joy more intense than that of coming upon a fact that cannot be understood in terms of currently accepted ideas. Wow. I feel like one sentence that tells you so much about who Cecilia is, that she would say that. Who would start a sentence with "there is no joy more intense than," and end it the way she ended it? I think it's profound, and she did experience that joy. She was able to experience that joy, I think, certainly when she discovered that the stars were made of hydrogen, a fact that overturned all the commonly accepted ideas about what the stars were made of. Overturned scientific orthodoxy. She got to experience that ecstasy. And the other thing I wanted to mention about Cecilia that helped me very, very much in the play was her love of theater, which she talks about repeatedly. They did amateur theatricals. They put on Shakespeare plays at home. She and her brother and sister. She went to the theater whenever she could. She says that if I hadn't become a scientist, I would have wanted to be an actress. And I realized I could use her theatrical imagination as a way of helping to bridge the gaps in time and space in the play, and to bring everybody on stage at the same time. I could sort of couple what I was doing to Cecilia's theatrical imagination. That was extremely helpful. This is just her sentence again. And Cecilia, at a later stage when she was at Harvard, where of course she remained for the rest of her career, and becoming the first woman to become an astronomy professor and the first woman to become chair of any department at Harvard, although for a long time lacking in official job titles, status, and salary. worthy of the work that she was doing. So 5 very different women, I began to realize, 5 extraordinarily different women, all united by this common love, passion for the work that they were doing um, at the observatory. And I began, before I could even think of how to construct the play, I thought, well, even if I can't figure out what the play consists of yet, I can try writing a monologue for each one of these women to hear their voice, try to hear how they would sound, how they would talk. Um, the monologues aren't connected to each other, just completely different moments in time. And but a couple of those monologues ended up making it into the play, actually, where they still are. But not only did I spend time learning about the women, but also there was a great deal about the place and the archives that became a rich resource. And here we owe a debt. When I say we, I mean me and Jessica Ernst, who was my partner in doing the research for this play. Uh, we owe a debt to Lindsay Smith-Thrall for, in her role as curator of astronomical photographs, uh, doing what, showing us so much about the glass plate collection, the glass plate stacks. Here, Mina shown in front of them, of course. Um, the other paraphernalia, the notebooks, which we were allowed to look through, the fly spankers, all the materials and the premises that still exist from the old days. When you're making a play, you have to invent so much. You have to create so much physical reality to put it on stage. And this was a gift to have so much of that just offered to us for our observation. And I became fascinated by the fly spankers, and they make it into the play, as you'll see. Their handmadeness, their little twisted wire holders, their little irregularities. So they come into the action too. And other archives too at Harvard were very full of riches for us. I'll just show you an example of something that I used. This is a letter from Annie's mother that she wrote to Annie. When Annie was a student at Wellesley, her mother was in Delaware. I read this letter in the Harvard archives and I thought, that has to go into the play. I don't know where, but I'm copying it down because I want it to go into the play. And her mother is saying, look at the skies in the Southwest tonight, soon after sunset. Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus in a beautiful group. It happens only once in 100 years, just as they are now. So look at them, Annie, and think, I am also doing it here, and I will think of you. And that, Annie says exactly those words in the play. She's quoting this letter from her mother to the other characters. And that idea of the connection of human beings through the stars, Annie's connection to her mother, Annie's connection to her youthful self when she received that letter, Annie's connection to other people in the audience who look at the stars. I found it very moving to, in a way, leave the play and expand the universe of meaning for everybody, the characters in the play, the audience, and people beyond. And Wolbach and Maria McEachern, whose guidance we were so grateful for. Maria put us onto so many wonderful leads that were immensely helpful in writing the play. Keith LaFortune's excellent master's thesis about women's work at the observatory, and the Dyer's Hand, Cecilia's autobiography that I've already mentioned. These were essential materials, and it was wonderful to have that guidance. And then Davis Sobel's book, which came out while we were working on the play. When we started, we didn't know her book was coming out. So that was also a great gift, providing so much narrative connection for us and historical information that we didn't already have. And we consulted it all along the way once it came out. And then we also consulted a lot of scientists, and I'm only going to name two of them right now. One, Cara Battersby, who is now a professor at the University of Connecticut, but at the time, Cara was a postdoc at the CFA, and she was generous enough to agree to be our astronomy tutor, which we desperately needed. And we would go sit in her office for a couple of hours at a time, and we would do astronomy with her. She taught us a lot. She presented us astronomical problems. We'd try to figure out, well, how would you go about solving this? And, you know, what does this mean? What does that mean? How do you approach it? How do you feel about this at a certain point when you're trying to make this discovery? It was a very full kind of very rapid astronomy tutorial. And then Owen Gingrich, who of course is emeritus at Harvard and who knows so much about the history of the science, also was very gracious in meeting with us and teaching us both science and science history. He gave us a lab in stellar spectra that he would used to give to his classes. And he also could tell us a great deal about Cecilia because he had been her PhD student at Harvard. And he had a lot of stories about her, not all of them published and available elsewhere. One thing that he told us that stuck with me, I think Owen didn't see this happen himself, but he heard about it from someone else at the observatory. But it's an image of Cecilia standing at the top of a staircase in the observatory and shouting about injustice. And when I heard that, I said, oh, that has to go into the play. But alas, it never did. It never did. I couldn't find a place for it. I'm still searching for a place for it, and maybe I can find one. So patterns began to emerge doing all this research and talking to people. Patterns of exclusion, the women being excluded from access to telescopes, the primary tool of their science, access to observatories, and that, even though they were working at Harvard, of course, but access to other observatories. And that, I believe, did not start changing until the 1970s, incredibly enough. Access to jobs, to official positions, to organizations, and so on. That was one pattern throughout all of their lives. And then another was the Matilda effect, which may be a familiar term invented by science historian Margaret Rossiter to describe the common phenomenon of a woman making a scientific discovery and the credit being given to a man for what she discovered. And that happened, in my view, to all of these women in one way or another. And yet, their tenacity, their devotion to the work they were doing, their resistance, their refusal to let the many obstacles thrown in their path completely deter them, even if they made their life more difficult. And they found solutions to two of the biggest mysteries in astrophysics, of course. How far away are the stars? And what are the stars made of? They invented the stellar spectra classification system in use around the world and classified hundreds of thousands of stars, among many other astronomical discoveries and contributions. And I very much wanted these facts to come into the play, to be part of the play and part of the action of the play, what they had accomplished. But for me, as I was doing the research and I continued to look at these antique photographs, they began to change. Their character began to change for me. And this one, a detail of the famous so-called paper dolls photograph, with Henrietta second from left and Annie on the right, I began to look at this photograph very differently. At first, it seemed like a charming pose, and it became more and more disturbing to me as time went on and as I learned more about the work that they had done. And then returning to the original photograph, this photo that had seemed so static and so quiet to me at the beginning just began to fill with energy and dynamism and ambition and drive and frustration. And to see the pose of these women, the posture, the gesture, heads bent, looking down. They're doing astronomy, but they're not looking up at the stars. They're looking down through a microscope at a tiny, tiny black dot. That just seemed to me to encapsulate so much about the paradoxes and contradictions of their situation and the dramatic power and the energy so that this picture almost came to seem almost explosive to me, almost so powerful, containing so much energy. And I wanted to try to put that on stage if I could. And then we acquired a cast along the way through doing workshops with the actors over a period of about a year and a half. We acquired set, projection, lighting, sound, and costume designers. Jessica was directing all the way through. And we were approaching opening night. This is Central Square Theater's poster. The Nora Theater is one of the two theaters under the aegis of Central Square Theater in Cambridge. And you're never ready for an opening night. There are always 1,000 things to do on opening night. And I was busy. I believe this was the day before opening. I was kind of in a panic. I was emailing with David Dvorkin, the curator at National Air and Space Museum, curator of astronomy, because he had written the biography of Henry Norris Russell. And I was really worried that in my zeal to defend Cecilia, I might have misrepresented Russell, who, of course, told Cecilia that she was wrong about the stars being made of hydrogen and triggered her retraction of her discovery, and thereby a great deal of subsequent misery in her life and failure to adequately recognize her. But I was incredibly relieved. David Dvorkin was so generous. He read the script. He told me, no, I didn't need to change what I'd written. He thought it was accurate. I had not been unfair to Henry Norris Russell, who himself had been unfair to Cecilia. Henry Norris Russell, of course, having published his own discovery that the sun is made of hydrogen 4 years after he saw Cecilia's thesis. So the play went up. And this is just an image of the stage with house lights up. The setting was the stage design was very simple, graphic, circles, lines, and stars everywhere, including on the floor here. And I think you might be able to just barely make out the blue, where my cursor is, the blue seats along the side. There was seating on 3 sides, both sides, and out here. And this portal was a kind of entrance, and there were many other entrances as well. This white string back here, you'll see more of in a minute, it's just a curtain of white string that the designers had chosen in order to be able to project images onto it, but at the same time allow the actors to come and go. It was a permeable curtain. And here's the same scene with the designer's lights. And I will just run through a bunch of production photos. The first thing you see in the play is Mina coming outside with a lantern, coming out of her house because she's heard her husband go out and she doesn't know where he's gone. He hasn't come back in. And she goes out to call him, not realizing, not knowing at the time that he has deserted her and she'll never see him again. He's abandoned her. She's pregnant. She's a new immigrant in this country. She has no resources. And by divine luck, which I was not the playwright creating that divine luck, another playwright did that. She got a job working for Edward Charles Pickering, the director of the observatory, starting as a maid and then rising to the heights that we know she rose to. And here, the other women are dressing Mina in her costume as supervisor of the workroom. And here is where time began to flow in the play. And this was one of the things that I did to try to use time in a way that would allow me to tell the key points in this story. Time flows a lot in the play. Sometimes it flows very rapidly. And here's a moment where 10 years pass in the time it takes to put a dress over Mina's head. And now she is Williamina Fleming, the supervisor of the workroom at Harvard Observatory. And here's something else that happened with time in the play. On her left is Cecilia Payne. Even though Mina is on stage in the 1880s, Cecilia is on stage in 1923. The two characters were in a sense, separate bubbles. Cecilia looking at a photo of Mina, thinking about her, talking to her, even though Mina can't hear her. And there was, I thought, a greater reality, a poetic reality to what this is doing on stage, because all of these women were Cecilia's forerunners, her mentors in a way, even if she didn't know them personally, as with Mina, her models in some way, even her mother figures in some way. I mean, Antonia later said, Cecilia is like a daughter to me. So I wanted to try to create that relationship. And Cecilia is trying to figure out from how Mina operates, how she herself might become an astronomer. And she's dressed in orange because Catherine, her daughter, said that orange was her favorite color. And a lot of her clothes had orange. So we gave her an orange costume. And then the play just clicks into the observatory workroom in the 1880s, and Mina giving assignments out. And here's Antonia, who does not want to do the assignment that she's being given and rebels against it, as she always rebels. She wants to do the work she wants to do, studying binary stars, and not what Pickering is asking her to do. And again, there's Cecilia watching what's going on, learning from it, commenting on it, not the others not being aware of her, of course. So the argument builds with Antonia and Mina trying to exert her authority. And I love this moment where Becca Lewis, who played Mina, is looking at Antonia, because Antonia has succeeded in seducing Mina into thinking about an astronomical problem and to take her attention away from worrying about editing and administrating and doing all the busy work of running the workroom and doing what she really wants to do that she never has enough time to do, which is working on astronomical questions. But that doesn't last for too long. This shows you what the stars looked like on the string curtain at the upper level at the back of the stage. And coming down from that upper level is Annie Jump Cannon, who carries a tin of oatmeal cookies. Annie was famous for her oatmeal cookies. And we always tried to get people in the audience to take an oatmeal cookie, but they almost never would. People were too shy to do it, but they were good oatmeal cookies. The stage manager made them every day fresh. But that was part of Annie's sociability, more sociable than anybody else. And she was also unique among those four women in being able, as far as I understand, to use the telescope for reasons I have never been able to find an explanation of why she was allowed and others were not. Henrietta Lovett, she's wearing a Acousticon carbon hearing aid, which was the hearing aid or a hearing aid in use at the time. The costume designer gave those to Henrietta and Annie, both of whom had hearing loss. We don't know how much they wore them, but we decided to do that. That's a subject I'm still trying to learn more about, what the nature of their hearing loss is and how they operated, given that issue for them. Cecilia, again, in her 1923 bubble, looking at the other women in the workroom, studying what they're doing, yearning to be part of that kind of work. And this is a little insert, a little scene that I inserted because I needed to give the audience some information about stellar spectra. So Annie gives a radio talk, which she actually did. She gave a bunch of radio talks and they're printed. So I was able to use some of her actual language in the play, explaining what the audience needed to know about stellar spectra. And this is Henrietta's monologue in which she's doing some embroidery. And this was not because I knew about Anna von Mertens's exhibition. I think I wrote this before that happened or became public knowledge, but because of something that Maria Mitchell said about girls and their training in needlework and how that might prepare them for doing astronomy. So Henrietta comes out doing this needlework and then gradually starts thinking about how she might use that in what she's doing in the workroom. She gets the idea here to invent the fly spanker, that she might be able to create a little handheld device. She works it out in her mind, and then she does a drawing of it, which you can not really make out in her notebook, but that's what she's holding up to show the audience. And then here, a tablecloth was thrown over the workroom table, and the women are having a dinner party. This is at Mina's house, where Annie was a boarder for a time, and Henrietta is bringing them fly spankers as hostess presents. And at first, Henrietta won't participate in drinking wine and general conviviality. But then she does when she finds out that they are celebrating Mina's appointment as the first woman to become a Harvard officer, her appointment as curator of astronomical photographs at the observatory. So then the drinking and the talking and the laughing get bigger and bigger, and they start laughing about how women are regarded, and they start collectively, they start collectively constructing a kind of dream about what's going to happen to women in the 20th century, because it's 1900 now. Time has slid or flown or glided without our knowing it, and it's 1900. And as they're talking and laughing about this dream of a woman in the 20th century who wants to be an astronomer, Cecilia walks into the room. And this is a jarring moment for the other women. Cecilia, this is where the time bubbles collapse, collide, shatter, and Cecilia walks into this dinner party. Even though Cecilia's just been born, she joins the party, and the other women are amazed, confused, bewildered. What's wrong with her hair? What's wrong with her clothes? They try to welcome her, but have a great deal of trouble wrestling with the idea that she has bent time in order to join them, as she herself says. And then they have the idea that Cecilia must be the realization, the incarnation of their dream. And she says, no, I'm not a dream. I'm real. I need to know how to be real. And I want to work here. The tablecloth is taken off and they're back in the workroom, dealing with some complicated issues that have come up. And Cecilia now gets to observe them and comment on them. Here is Mina at the point of her death. That's supposed to be the Horsehead Nebula in the background. Can't really make it out in this photo. And now the discovery scenes begin. Henrietta beginning to make her discovery about the period luminosity relation. She just decides to take two stars and compare them, compare their brightness and compare their period, and see if she can find a correlation. And Cecilia is there watching, interpreting, getting more and more excited as Henrietta makes her discovery. So Cecilia gets to kind of interpret this for the audience so we can understand it too. Henrietta's notebooks projected onto the string curtain. It was easier to see them in the production than it is here. Tables of figures. And then she starts to make a graph. And we see her in the play adding one dot, another, and the curve gradually becoming manifest, and Cecilia getting more excited, Henrietta getting more excited, and Cecilia says, finally, draw the line, which Henrietta does. And this is a moment of ecstasy for the two of them, the ecstasy of discovery, of finding a fact about the universe that no one has ever seen before, and Cecilia prays that it can happen to her. And then Henrietta's discovery becomes a kind of model for her, and she begins checking her math for her thesis. This is her PhD thesis that she's working on, checking her math over and over again because she's worried that she's made a mistake, but she hasn't. Looking at the glass plate again, and she's desperate to tell somebody that what she has discovered, that she thinks the stars are made of hydrogen, and that her desperation invokes the presence of Mina, and she begins talking to Mina about it. Mina is dead by now. She's wearing this garment that was a sort of iridescent shawl, and And she talks to Cecilia about what Cecilia's discovered. And she's trying to persuade her that this is the truth. The stars are made of hydrogen, even though this is overturning everything that everyone knows about the composition of the stars. And as she looks at her calculations, the letters of the periodic table begin to manifest behind the numbers. And I thought this was such a moving moment that the projection designer found. And he created this video after going and reading Cecilia's PhD dissertation, Stellar Atmospheres. He went and read it. I also read it, or read as much of it as I could, tried to read it, because we wanted to be true to it in principle. And she finally commits to her discovery, only to be shattered by the letter from Henry Norris Russell, to whom she sends her findings, who tells her that she's wrong. The stars can't possibly be made of hydrogen. Many years have passed, decades have passed, and I'm leaving out some things in the play, but the women appear, all four of the earlier women now, wearing those iridescent shawls. They've all passed away. They've all gathered, though, at this moment, because there's an event happening, something exciting happening that involves Cecilia, and they want to be present for it. And it takes a while before we find out what it is. And then Cecilia enters, and it's a celebration for the women graduate students of her becoming chair of the Department of Astronomy. She says she's camera shy, just they're taking pictures because it's an important occasion. So she says, take the pictures, but don't, just take them. The other women get up on stage with her and take hands, and they want to be near her, even though they can't appear in the picture because their time is gone. But behind and up on the curtain, on the string curtain, is the paper doll's photograph. And as the camera keeps flashing and flashing and flashing, taking photos of Cecilia, more and more women's faces are added to that paper doll's photograph in front of the original line of women. Here's Cecilia herself, and many other women keep getting added beyond this. And that's where the play ends. And I'll just end with this statement from Alyssa Goodman, who came to see the show and said, I stand in awe of the female pioneer scientists of the Harvard College Observatory, whose struggles were so much greater than my own. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'd be happy to answer questions if we have time for some. If anybody has questions, thank you. Thank you.